Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome to another great episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Cherokee Boos. In this episode, we're going to be continuing on a part 2 for explaining resource management. We're going to be looking at forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, and no, we're not wrapping. We're actually diving deeper into that resource management, and we're going to be looking at personnel management. And who better to help us with that than Mr. Ronnie Wong. Thank you for being with us here today, Ronnie.
Well, thank you for having me back on the show as we continue on with our Project Plus show here. We're now taking a look into that exciting realm of personnel management. That's right. We've already talked in that episode 1, right? That part 1 of resource management, where we talked about equipment and material and even a little bit of human resource types of management. But when it comes down to it, what's going to also end up happening is as you bring people together for your project that you have in hand, you're going to have to realize something, that not everybody's worked on a project before, and it could be that way. Not everybody's actually ready to do everything they need to. So you're going to actually have to deal with more than just the idea of resource availability and allocation very many times. And now what you're talking about is multiple people coming together, and we have to be able to get all those different personalities, all the other things that they're used to doing, to work together, well, as a team. And that is what we're really talking about. And so there's some challenges there that we really need to get through.
Ronnie, what are those big challenges that you're talking about there? With the team building, it seems like there could be potentially room for quite a few.
There's a lot of different challenges, and not all of them, of course, are just personality based. But especially if you're working with me, there's probably going to be personality based. But overall, though, what you tend to see is that there's actually location challenges. If your project is large and you now actually have to manage multiple location sites because of how big your project is, remember that means coordination efforts between those projects to actually carry on, and what you also have to be able to do. Also, realizing the resource allocation when you're working with full and part-time resources as well may also have to be considered when you realize that there it is, you're on the weekend, and what you don't have access to is full-time resources. You have access to only part-time resources that are actually willing to work. And then you might even have the difference between technical people that are really very good at what they're doing, and then non-technical people that are more administrative support as well, and realizing you're not going to be able to assign some of those to technical challenges that you have on hand. Temporary, ideas that you have instead of something that's someone that's actually going to come in and do a lot. They may come in just for a specific part. You name it, there's all of that. So what we have to be able to do is understand that there's the challenge of just those things, but the key for us, especially if we're going to be doing project management, is to form and to develop a great project team. And that entire list of what Cherokee made out as being wrapping words for us is actually going to be some of the key ideas to helping us to develop the team, and to understand team development is what we really need to do. And so that's what we're going to go through, is we're going to talk about each one of those different aspects of team developmental phases to help us to understand how a team gets formed and why we need to understand something like this in project management. Is because we tend to pull from a lot of technical backgrounds. We tend to pull from a lot of different groups of people and individuals which might be used to actually being like the top dog, and here they might not be the top dog, and now they have to work with someone else. So that's where we're going. And so we're going to take a look at all of those different, make sure I count them right, 5 phases that we actually have to do. So let's start off with the one that Cherokee started off with. Cherokee, do you remember the very first one you mentioned?
Of course I do. That was forming.
All right. So let's go ahead and take a look. This way, this helps us out. So if we take a look at my computer, I kind of just did a summary of some of the things that we really want to make sure that we understand when we start to take a look here. The idea of forming at this particular point in time, okay, is that really it comes down to this. When you bring a bunch of different people together that have not worked together before, they really have to understand the very beginning of why in the world they're working together for this project. So they're not really a team yet at this particular point, but what they're actually here to do is to understand, hey, this is why we are gathered together. And here you get this kind of unusual psychological sense of the group where not everybody feels comfortable, okay? And a lot of times the very beginning and the very first few meetings people are more formal and they're more reserved and usually very businesslike because they're not sure what to expect. They're not sure, you know, if this is something that's going to be relaxing or is it something that's going to be very formal. Nobody wants to actually get themselves portrayed as someone that can't do the job.
Slacker.
Yeah, they don't want to be portrayed as the slacker as well. And so when you have stuff like this, you've got to realize that these are the attitudes that's going to come together in the idea of building a team, okay, is that they're going to just kind of look around and see who they think is ready for this, who they don't think is ready for it, and you hate to say it, there does become just in that natural group together a pecking order that will end up happening.
It's just kind of a human nature. It's not something that people, it's very hard to not form any kind of judgments, but it happens, right?
It really does happen, and there is issues that you have to deal with, but you do have to let it happen naturally and allow them to actually see, because that's where you really want your leadership to come from. It's not so much you just pointing at somebody and go, you're going to lead this, and everybody around the room goes, there's no way that guy's going to be able to do that. Now, don't get me wrong. People have always been able to overcome and actually do the things that they've been called on to do. But if you allow them that possibility to step up and to shine on their own rather than you appointing them,
right,
they become a natural type of leader in the group. Now, in that sense, when I talk about that idea of natural leader in the group, that is what starts to happen when you leave them together long enough so that they realize they're going to be working together. And the phase that we end up taking a look at that particular point in time is one that we call storming, is what we call it at this point. Now, in the idea of storming here, this is where somebody really is. We call it the idea here of alpha positioning. They want to find out who in this group is going to be the top guy. Okay, the one that I'm going to press Cherokee's movie knowledge here.
Oh.
Have you ever seen the movie Top Gun?
Oh, it was ages ago.
Yeah, you were probably very young. I'm going to assume you were very, very young when you saw the movie Top Gun. And so if you actually saw it at all, you may not have even seen it at all for all I know. But in the movie Top Gun, right, these are supposed to be the best of the best, you know, according to the movie. And so everybody, as they're actually gathered there, they're all looking around, and, you know, Tom Cruise's character, of course, is just looking around saying, I'm just trying to figure out one of the guys says, I'm just trying to figure out who's the best of the best in this room. And of course, you know, they all answer, you know, it's me,
right,
it's me, it's me. Well, even though all of them may believe that, you'll actually end up seeing somebody jockeying for that position is what you'll see. So they call it alpha positioning here,
okay,
where they really are. They're standing up and they're saying,
that
yes.
Storm's a brewing. We've got that terminology. We can relate it to some kind of associations there.
Well, and this is where they can become confrontational. If you go, no, I'm actually going to be the leader, and that guy goes, I'm going to be the leader, well, that's when they'll challenge that. So it's the same in the animal world where you have something like this going on, but storming is a very natural part of when groups come together.
And then they've got to hash it all out together, right?
Yeah, and that's the idea of jockeying for control, right? So it's not enough just so that you're the alpha. You really do have to be able to have also the same time charisma or enough personality and enough influence in that group that is just formed that you actually can now control that group. And I don't mean by control by twisting them, but to have enough influence in that group to now begin to try and line everybody up. Without the idea of forming going on where they get used to each other's presence first, okay, and then feeling comfortable enough to then establish whatever is going to happen here, okay, and who's actually going to end up being kind of the natural leader in the group, you're going to find your team always relying on you as the project manager to step in, okay, to actually challenge whatever somebody says. And this is not what you want to happen when you form a team. You as a project manager, you should say, you're a team, you do this, you know, you figure this out, y'all set this up, because you as a project manager, you're not only managing that team, right? You're having to actually oversee multiple teams. Well, if you're actually the one that says, all right, here it is, Cherokee, you're going to do this, okay? And then somebody in the group goes, well, I don't know why I wasn't considered, okay? Why wasn't I considered for that? And then every decision that Cherokee makes that he disagrees with, he doesn't go to Cherokee, even though that's who he should go to. He just simply oversteps Cherokee and says, here's what I think should happen. Cherokee said, this is the way it's going to be. And I can always say what? what Cherokee says is good, and that's the way it goes. Well, then that person goes back and does what? Starts to kind of grumble and starts to complain a bit more. And then even though Cherokee is the leader in terms of title that I presented, every decision that she makes that's being disagreed with gets challenged. And then I have to come back in, or somebody has to come back and go, all right, here it is. Here's the way it's going to be. Y'all better follow this. Next decision comes along, they'll do the same thing.
But ultimately, it does come down to that project manager's responsibility, right? So they have to go ahead and take control. If they see a leader that's maybe not getting the respect that they need, then they're going to have to make that judgment call.
That is definitely true. The very fact is, it is their responsibility, but imagine having to do that for 6 teams, okay? That every time that a decision is made. So even though they may actually kind of bow out in 1 or 2 decisions, after a while, now you're dealing with 6 different teams that are constantly coming to you like, well, you need to make a decision on this because I believe Cherokee's making the wrong decision. And in that, Cherokee's like, well, you got to support me behind this. And then I have to evaluate that and go, either I agree with them or not. But in this sense, right, if we allow for the storming and for that forming to go on naturally,
Less
right?
micromanagement.
Less micromanagement has to take place. And so as much as it pains you to see people jockeying for those positions, and you want to step in, you really want to try and allow for something like this to happen. So understanding the natural way that this is going to happen is really a key aspect of doing something like the idea of developing a team. It doesn't always have to happen that way. If you want to actually run it like essentially the way that the Army does it, right? They say, here's who you're going to listen to. Great. As long as everybody that you hire, okay, doesn't have previous experience in being the top dog or understanding that. But in this sense, when you do have experts in your field, and so here's where you get storming happening right away instead of the forming that goes on, right? Where you go, I've called together the top 10 people that can help me do this, okay? And then every one of them have been a project lead in some big, gigantic project together. And now you're saying, I'm now going to make you equals. Good luck. Okay?
Yeah.
And naturally allowing those guys to say, I'm not equal to Ronnie. I am superior. I have the better experience. I have the better knowledge behind this. So I should naturally be this. Okay? And so in that sense, yeah, you really don't need that happening. So a lot of times in your team forming, you do have to allow for that awkwardness to happen and allow them to learn, each other. And then they also have to see as a group who is really going to really help them to succeed in the project, and if they can actually find the respect and if they can find the influence to do so, they will become kind of the natural leader, and people will listen to them because they trust them and they actually respect that person instead of them going, well, that's the way that Ronnie said it is.
That's the pecking order.
Yeah, that's the pecking order. And in that sense, that's not very satisfying. And you can now figure out why people then just kind of go, I don't want to work on that project. Let's just get out of here and do that. And now you're left with a hole and a gap. So being able to figure out how teams really do naturally develop in those phases is really important for us when we start to see just the very beginning there. Okay?
Norming. This is such a weird word, norming.
The next phase that we take a look at, it is kind of unusual, but norming is exactly like it sounds. Everybody now starts to kind of feel comfort or naturally reached if you allow for it to happen. So they actually understand, what in that group dynamic, okay, what their positions are and their particular places are going to be, whether it's a hierarchical type of group or whether you kind of settle out and everybody kind of collaborates together, you actually figure that out as well. And then when you have norming that goes on, everybody starts to kind of drop away from the idea of interpersonal problems, instead of focusing on them. During that storming stage and that forming stage, interpersonal problems can happen. I'm not going to say they're going to be the biggest explosions ever, but they happen. Here at this particular point, they just chalk it up to...
They've accepted it. They've kind of settled into their own little positions, and they're ready to get working.
Yeah, that's when they just say, that's just Ronnie being Ronnie. And and what happens then is that they just realize something, that even though Ronnie doesn't work well in a group, he tends to contribute. He tends to still do what he needs to do, and then he's actually able to kind of work his way through. Also, people tend to respect each other to actually be able to allow for decisions to be made jointly. One person doesn't always make the decision because you'll naturally kind of come to that agreement and figure that out. Mutual responsibility and even a bit of familiarity. In other words, even saying good morning to the entire team in the morning. I know that sounds weird. Or saying good night to the entire team, when you actually leave, from that day. So when you don't have the norming that goes on, you have a little bit of productivity and a lot of mountain that you have to climb. When norming settles in, the majority of your work, as the team actually begins to work very well, and then you have to deal with some of the minor things such as, personality disruptions that happen. Somebody just gets fed up just too many times and it explodes every once in a while. But here, the idea is simple. They feel comfortable with each other. They are now ready to begin to actually operate efficiently as a team. And that is when it moves into that realm of what we call performing at that point. Okay? Notice the way that I have this summarized here. Team becomes effective and productive. Okay? Makes sense, right? Because now you understand where everything is. Everybody feels comfortable. You now just go ahead and you start doing your job. Okay? Team members start to trust each other and actually begin to trust each other. Work really does get accomplished from this. If you are not seeing team performance happening, okay, there is probably some stage that you've missed at the beginning. Whether it was the norming or the storming stage, you never really got to that particular point where performance would come in to actually hit what you actually needed to. And so we tend to see a lot of this, especially on very high performance types of teams, where they just know that if it's done, and it's good, and it's over with. But when you don't have that sense of trust there, you actually end up seeing that team will work together to a point, and then they won't trust on certain levels, and then they'll try and do everything on their own. And you see this a lot in sports teams as well, where everything's working great through the game, and then they just fall apart at the end when they feel like that everything is falling apart. They revert back to old bad habits, and that's what can also happen too. But performing starts to happen. And then ultimately, one of the harder things to do in terms of team development is that adjourning. In other words, the finishing up of everything after the project is over, and that it's actually complete here, the breaking up of the team. Realizing that these people, as much as they might have enjoyed the project, hopefully that's what happened, okay, and not actually trudge through the project, that now they're actually breaking up kind of this very neat unit that they've been working very well with, and they desire to work with those people again. Okay. So that's where a team really does have its natural development phases that we tend to see when you start taking a look at the idea of team development here. It really does end up happening for us if that team is together for a good long time. You actually end up seeing that all this can actually happen very, very, quickly, or it can happen over time. You might find out that you might get a team together, and it might be weeks before anything like this actually comes to the norming stage. But then there's sometimes where the people just kind of gel. Norming happens very easily, and then performance happens just about immediately as well.
So what if you have this cohesive team, all right? Everyone's already met each other. We've gone through these developmental phases. But what if we integrate someone new, maybe a new hire during one of those latter phases? That kind of throws a wrench in your plan there.
It absolutely will throw a wrench in the plan. And the weird thing about the way that teams really do develop, it's not just as simple as just folding somebody in. It's not like adding in a little bit of water into cake mix and then go, ooh, I need to change that. What ends up happening is that you end up seeing that the same thing starts to happen over again, okay? So, in other words, you might see where your entire team really does go back to the idea of forming again, okay? And then you might see where now somebody goes, oh, now this person agrees with me, and they start storming through again, and then they feel natural and get to that performance stage. But there's times, though, where you might find out the person just really does fit into the group. But even so, right, everybody still has to go through that because they realize that the team dynamic has changed by the addition of a person in there. And so we now need to include them in, or you might find out that the group excludes them completely. Yeah, it's kind of bad. They get ostracized. It's like me when I was in grade school. Oh, no, I'm joking. Don't worry about me. I've gotten over that by now. But overall, though, you kind of get this idea, right, that every time you introduce new team members in, you'll see this naturally happen. Hopefully, as a project manager, you won't have to lead them through it, but you've got to realize the steps that it really does take to form that team, because if not, you're going to find yourself in that position between norming and real true performance that happens, that it's just not going to be there. You're going to wonder why everybody feels comfortable and laughing around, but they can't get anything done. And so that might be okay, you know, but usually it's not, especially if it's a project. You just don't have enough time to do that. You really do need to see where people are in their stage, especially on project management and personnel management, as you start working through the project there too. Okay. Now, how can we actually make this happen? I don't want to say naturally anymore, but how can we kind of nudge it? I could say force it. How do we force this down somebody's throat here?
Like a catalyst.
Yeah, yeah. What can you do to actually do that? Well, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. And when it comes down to it, and you've probably heard this in any, you know, kind of team performance improvement, self-improvement program, mentoring, somebody that you actually talk about, there's a couple of things that they end up doing. So let's take a look at a couple of these, okay? To me, I like the idea of the second one, which we call informal activities, okay? Now, informal activities are good once you get people past that forming and storming stage. Informal activities, not so good during the storming or during the forming and storming stages as well, okay? Now, when I say that, okay, that means that, well, the reason why, right, is that they might not feel super comfortable with each other yet, okay? So the idea of you going, hey, let's go and grab a couple of beers after work.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I see it up there, and I don't know how well that would, you know, mesh together with the alpha personalities.
Yeah, with everybody
trying
trying to do that.
Yeah,
it's very difficult, okay? But once they get past that, informal activities are good because it helps to build the continuity in the team. They understand that they can grab a couple of beers, or you can actually do a team lunch. That allows them to feel, you know, kind of good and stay away from the focus of work, right? So team building in this sense, right, on your team, doing this on a periodic basis is really good during a project when there's high pressure, when high performance is always demanded of your team. Informal activities are key, right? Even if it's just bringing in donuts every once in a while. Now, I shouldn't use donuts because apparently everybody, you know, around here doesn't like donuts except for me. I love them. And so when somebody brings donuts in, I'm usually the one that eats all of them, and that's the problem, right? And so, yeah, Peter kind of brings in like 3 dozen. I think I eat 2.5 of them. So that's what happens.
It's just that they're so good that we will probably eat all of them, so we try to refrain.
Yeah, so, and I don't have that problem because I have no inhibitions about eating multiple donuts where everybody else does. So for me, it's probably not a great idea because it probably affects my heart, but overall, though, you start to see this. So informal activity is really good.
But those formal ones, those are kind of the awkward moments, aren't they?
They really are. Okay, now when you start to do, it always reminds me of movies that you see on these things, right? There's always that trust fall, you know.
It always makes me think of like those stickers, the hello, my name is stickers.
Yeah, that's one of those unusual formal activities that you have. And we traditionally, you start off with what everybody starts off with, right? An icebreaker game, right?
Yeah.
Just to kind of get you to do something silly to break the tension that's actually in the air. But they are very effective during this formal forming and storming stages, okay? And the reason why is that it shows that somebody has something together and they really want the meshing to actually occur faster than a natural development might, okay? Now, when you start doing this, right, when you start realizing that this has to be done quickly, you tend to actually kind of pull out all the stops in this formal activity thing, okay? Now, this can actually range from anything, right? So for me, because I'm cheap, it would be, all right, here's what we're going to do, and you better trust each other doing this, okay, in doing that. But you do have companies that say, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have this weekend retreat, you know, doing paintball or whatever it is, you know, going to one of these camps that actually build these trust relationships where you're standing on top of a 6-foot table and just fall backward, just go ahead and fall backward. The team will catch you. And doing that type of thing. And that's a little bit unnerving, especially with people you don't know, but it kind of lets you know that they're really trying to do that. So a project manager that says this is the best effort that we can have and they need to have it done real quickly, you tend to go for those I want to call them the extreme Olympics of team formal activities.
I've actually done that before. Yeah.
And what was your overall impression?
I really thought it was very effective, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Did you feel more comfortable with your team after? Did you feel bonds being made that you'd move into the norming stage?
I definitely do. I even still feel like those people are really close to me.
And that's what it does, is that you end up getting that. And then, did you feel that way, like, let's say, right after the formal activity? You go, all right, these are cool people. I can work with these guys.
I kind of knew they were cool ahead of time.
Oh, well, if you already knew they were cool ahead of time, that's a little
right.
bit more. But if you were to do an activity like with me and you didn't know me, you might go, not really.
Yeah,
not
I
so
probably
much.
wouldn't know ahead
you
of
probably
time.
wouldn't have done that. So overall, though, but that's one of those things, especially if I were the one falling backward and you had to catch, that would probably be kind of awkward overall. But you can see where this actually does allow everybody to get to know each other, okay? But it really does require then at that point for the project manager, to be seen as leading this type of team activity, okay? So he becomes the actual real leader at this point of forming and then the storming as they're going through this. And that way they know that who they're supposed to approach. And that's what you want to do, if you have that opportunity, right? The natural way is by far the best, but in a project management where you're pulling in multiple resources from very diverse backgrounds, you might find out you're the one that you really does need to make those decisions. So you need to be the one leading these activities so that they know that afterwards they go to you, okay? That you're the one that they're really going to pull on and ask questions of and be able to actually provide the answers that they need. So it's really important that you understand that particular role of actually doing these types of formal and informal types of activities as well, okay? Now, when we start to take a look at some of the other things then, we actually have to talk just briefly a little bit here on, let me make sure that I'm covering it, on team selection as well. So let's talk about that briefly for a moment, Cherokee, is the idea of what we call team selection.
Can we look at some guidelines, maybe just some tips for some team member selection, Ronnie?
Well, we can talk about some guidelines. I don't really have anything on my screen to show some of these different guidelines here. But overall, though, when we talk about the idea of guidelines for team selection when you're starting to build a project, okay, first and foremost, we want to actually make sure that everybody knows at the very beginning when you select a team, okay, what has to be accomplished, okay. From that point, you can actually then select team members based on the need that you have, or you can actually go ahead and go, all right, Cherokee, you're already good at this. You're already good at this, okay? What we need to do is we need to show you how you actually now perform for our team and our project here, okay? So actually, this is a great example of what we're talking about right here, and I'm using Cherokee as a real example. In this sense, Cherokee has already been teaching CompTIA and Microsoft Server and other things that I've never even heard of. So she knows how to present this stuff in that formal classroom-led training. Well, the way that we're doing it here is a little bit more
informal,
a little bit more, kind of throwing it back and forth so that we have this. So in that sense, we don't really have to teach her much on the knowledge side. She probably knows more than I do about this stuff.
But I'm definitely awkward.
A little bit awkward there is what you should let other people tell you that instead.
Oh, okay, all right.
No, overall though, but instead, this is what we do, right? We say we wanted her on our team because we realized something, that we could actually go ahead and do what we call training for performance at this point. In other words, we're just taking her knowledge and her skills and showing her how to actually perform at IT Pro TV, okay? So in that sense, it really can. So when you actually do have team selection, you really have those two possibilities in general. Don't get me wrong, there's many, but in general, you either go ahead and you hire for the need that you have and go, this is exactly who I need, or you sit there and go, all right, I'm not really concerned so much about the knowledge base that they have, but who do we want that we can get and we train them how to perform the way that we want to.
Well, you see there's a lot of characteristics that they're not really things that can be trained upon, things like integrity and a lot of those intrapersonal skills that that you spoke about earlier.
Yeah, there are a lot of these things where we just have to kind of feel it out and understand what happens here. But in a project setting, again, those are usually the two big things here. Okay, if you have a lot more time where it's available and the project's not starting for another 6 months, you may actually hire a group of people that you develop into your team. Okay, to get ready for this project that's going on. But there's a lot of times where instead you actually do have to hire for the need that you have, and then you actually work with them instead. So there's a lot more for us to actually go and take a look at, But Cherokee, I think I've talked way too much at this segment.
Yeah, I'm
so
going to have
far.
to cut you off, Ronnie. That's it for this episode, guys. We've looked at quite a bit so far for our personnel management and how to look at those resources. Thank you guys for tuning in, but stay tuned because we have another episode coming your way. I'm Cherokee Booth,
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
signing off. Have a great day.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.